Have you ever wondered what happens to soldiers after the cameras shut off? When Russian state television switches off, a chilling reality unfolds. The nation's military might is glorified through carefully crafted propaganda, showcasing victorious warriors returning to emotional reunions and medals, painting a misleading picture of glory. But the truth? It's far darker. Beneath the facade of heroism lies a catastrophic aftermath, a haunting legacy that leaves both human lives and society shattered. Since the onset of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, over 750 veterans have resorted to violence, tragically targeting their former loved ones upon returning home. This alarming trend reveals a staggering reality. More than just statistics, these numbers highlight a systemic disaster, with a nation's own youth weaponized and exploited for the gain of a privileged few. As 140,000 soldiers transition back to civilian life by mid-2025, the lofty promises of reintegration devolve into bureaucratic nightmares. Veterans are expected to blend seamlessly into society, yet many carry the heavy burdens of post-traumatic stress disorder and violent tendencies. Reports indicate that issues like substance abuse will plague these individuals, echoing their struggles amidst a system ill-equipped to offer real support. Rural recruits, targeted for military service, now return home grappling with missing limbs and internal scars, often abandoned in their time of need. Consider the staggering statistics: 1 in 5 veterans battling PTSD while facing a severe shortage of trained therapists in Russia. Even amidst desperate attempts by the government to provide assistance, the priority remains with military veterans, leaving orphans and the underprivileged in dire straits. This skewed societal structure breeds resentment, leading to a ticking time bomb of disillusionment among those forgotten by the system. In the shadows of glory lies an undeniable truth: military service may just be a path that leads to crime. Observers draw uncanny parallels between today's struggle and the rise of crime among veterans following the Soviet-Afghan conflict. Yet, today's crisis extends beyond, with nearly 1 million casualties suffered by the Russian forces. The scale of this fallout is unprecedented. The mounting challenges of reintegrating veterans create a volatile mix for society. Many struggling individuals may become entwined with criminal elements, driven by desperation and the remnant echoes of their training. As organized crime groups recruit skilled ex-soldiers, a surge in violence looms. Those who once wore a uniform now walk the fine line between soldier and criminal. Moreover, newly implemented laws against discrediting the military curtail free speech and hinder investigations into veterans' crimes. Prevention of scrutiny becomes a strategy, perpetuating the cycle where military service is the sole avenue to necessary social services while simultaneously fueling an increase in urban crime. Ultimately, the veteran's return is far from a grand homecoming. It's a harsh awakening filled with ghosts of the past and a future marred by conflict. As soldiers are thrust back into communities where they are treated with hesitance, the question remains: can a nation so consumed by war ever truly heal? The situation for returning Russian soldiers is dire. Official estimates state that 300,000 troops were dispatched during the initial year of conflict. However, the term reintegration support, often highlighted in Russian media, serves merely as a bureaucratic smokescreen hiding an impending social crisis. Many veterans are forecasted to experience severe psychological distress, including post-traumatic stress disorder, coupled with aggressive behavior tendencies. Insight from the Center for European Policy Analysis and sources like Meduza, a Lithuanian-based independent news outlet, has uncovered worrying trends. Specialist interviews reveal that these soldiers face a bleak future, marred by rampant substance abuse and lack of adequate mental health services. The reality is grim: those discharged with debilitating injuries often find themselves unsupported, grappling with what remains of their lives. Imagine warriors returning home, only to confront daily life with amputated limbs and haunting memories of lost comrades. The Russian military has primarily recruited from rural areas, further sealing the fate of these ex-soldiers in the clutches of alcohol addiction. Statistical projections indicate that 1 in 5 war veterans is grappling with PTSD, yet the nation struggles with a shortage of mental health professionals, fewer than one therapist for every 7,000 adults. Some government efforts reportedly aim to mitigate these hardships. An initiative named the Defenders of the Fatherland Foundation has allocated tens of billions of rubles to assist veterans and their families. Their regional branches claim to aid returning soldiers in securing housing and medical care. However, with such a small number of mental health services available, is the Foundation's gesture merely scratching the surface of a deeper, festering wound in society? As soldiers reintegrate into their communities, many remain trapped in a cycle of trauma and despair. The negligence surrounding their mental health and welfare directly contributes to escalating crime rates. Could this dire situation echo the tragic patterns seen in history, where the repercussions of war extend far beyond the battlefield? What happens when those who once fought for their country return as threats to their own communities? Stay tuned, the story is more complex and shocking than it seems. The ripple effects of war often reach far beyond the battlefield, and nowhere is this more evident than in Russia today. As soldiers return from their harrowing experiences in Ukraine, a troubling reality emerges. Many of these veterans, unable to reintegrate into normal life, find themselves spiraling into a life of crime. This isn't an incidental problem but an alarming outcome of the conditions they face. Recent studies from experts, including those at the Jamestown Foundation, draw eerie parallels between today's returning soldiers and those known as Afghansy from the Soviet-Afghan War. Back then, ex-soldiers significantly contributed to the rise in crime at the twilight of the Soviet Union. The scale of today's issue, however, is staggering. The Soviet-Afghan conflict spanned a decade, deploying approximately 620,000 troops. Compared to that, Russia's ongoing war has led to about 1 million casualties by early 2025, with around 700,000 soldiers still on the front lines. As we dive deeper into the numbers, it becomes apparent that an estimated 1.5 to 2 million Russian soldiers have been involved in the conflict at some point over the past several years. This raises a crucial question: how many of these brave souls actually make it back home, whole and unscarred? The stark reality is sobering. Many troops may return only to find themselves trapped in a cycle of PTSD, unemployment, and violence. Moreover, the emergence of a new group of veterans, referred to as Ukrainsy, opens the door to potential political ramifications. If they align with nationalist politicians eager to push aggressive expansionist policies, the very fabric of security in both urban centers and small towns could be jeopardized. Adding fuel to this fire is the alarming trend of recruiting convicted criminals into the military, only further complicating an already volatile situation. Reports indicate that in 2023 alone, at least 190 criminal cases were initiated against pardoned recruits from the Wagner Group. These former inmates, equipped with modern warfare skills and returned to society with little accountability, are transforming into a nightmare for law enforcement. As organized crime groups eagerly tap into this pool of trained veterans, the implications are daunting. This chaotic landscape paints a vivid picture: an underworld fueled by violence, where the lines between soldier and criminal blur, and where society itself pays the price for the aftershocks of war. How will this dire situation evolve, and what hidden twists lie on the horizon? Summary of the previous part: the situation has worsened with ex-convicts from Wagner being reintegrated into society. At least 190 criminal cases were opened against these pardoned recruits in 2023. This influx of former soldiers into the criminal underworld is creating significant challenges for law enforcement. The aftermath of war often breeds chaos, but in Russia, it has fostered a nightmare. Experts now term this phenomenon the Wagnerization of the criminal underbelly. Gangs are now actively recruiting these former soldiers as assassins or bodyguards. The escalation of violent crime creates an alarming cycle that spirals out of control, reminiscent of times when the military directly influenced crime. With mental health support virtually non-existent, these veterans find themselves trapped. When they inevitably become offenders, the justice system often shows leniency, viewing their service to the motherland as a mitigating factor. Meanwhile, the Kremlin has tightened its grip with a law penalizing any dissent against the armed forces. This draconian measure stifles independent journalism and instills fear in those who may witness the crimes committed by returning veterans. As military service becomes a primary route to receive any form of assistance, it paradoxically fuels a crime wave in urban areas, positioning these soldiers above the law. The irony isn't lost on anyone. The same institution that promises stability is breeding a new generation of criminals. However, military life is far from idyllic. The relentless challenges faced by soldiers on the battlefield are crippling. An outdated strategy based on mass assaults and flawed tactics has led to catastrophic losses. Deployed soldiers are frequently used as disposable pawns in warfare, often against a backdrop of superior enemy defenses and advanced technology like unmanned aerial systems. Imagine the sounds of gunfire, the acrid smell of smoke, and the tension thick in the air as Russian troops press on against an enemy with a strategically advanced setup. Amidst this turmoil, the units suffer from inadequate supplies and equipment. The inevitable breakdown of these offensives reveals an archaic military strategy rooted in centralized command, where responsibility is lost amidst bureaucratic red tape. As the struggles continue, one must wonder, what is the real cost of this conflict when both soldiers and society at large pay the price? In the shadows of the conflict zone, a different story unfolds, a tale of false heroism and its bitter aftermath. The Russian government has been broadcasting heartwarming narratives of brave soldiers returning home, enveloped in the warmth of family reunions and community celebrations. But what lurks beneath the surface of this tranquil facade is a chilling reality, one that unveils the horrific consequences of a war that has ravaged not just the battlefield but the very fabric of Russian society. As brave stories streamed from state television, thousands of soldiers were actually facing a cold, hard truth upon their return. A staggering 750 of these veterans have committed grievous acts against family and friends. Why? Because the war doesn't just claim lives on distant fronts, it wreaks havoc in homes, leading to devastating outcomes that ripple through communities. While the screen shows medals and celebrations, many veterans return with psychological scars unseen and unacknowledged. Imagine 140,000 soldiers coming home, each laden with unaddressed trauma from a war that has taken a significant toll. It's said that for every 5 veterans, one grapples with post-traumatic stress disorder. This immense burden is exacerbated by an alarming shortage of mental health support. With fewer than one therapist available for every 7,000 adults, hope for recovery becomes a mere illusion. How can a society heal when the resources required are neglected? This abandonment becomes a catalyst for a darker cycle. With no support, many veterans fall prey to substance abuse and crime, echoing the heartbreak of their service. They are left to navigate a landscape where their experiences twist into rage or despair, often resulting in dire consequences for themselves and their communities. Could this narrative of valor become a precursor to a rise in criminal activity among those who once wore the uniform with pride? As the numbers reveal, a shocking connection emerges. The explosion of violence among veterans mirrors a historical cycle. The chaos born from the Soviet-Afghan War casts a long shadow, yet today's events are amplified exponentially. With over 1 million casualties and a relentless deployment of troops, the scars run deeper than those of the past. Consider the ramifications of recruitment practices that welcome not only brave soldiers but also those with criminal backgrounds. Approximately 190 cases of former convicts, now branded as veterans, unleashed havoc upon their return. Trained in the art of modern warfare yet unprepared to re-enter civilian life, the streets of Russia are filled with unsettling anxieties. With military service transformed into a currency that affords preferential treatment, a toxic disparity emerges, creating a society divided along the lines of service and neglect. Now, the state's response to its own recklessness is radically distorted. The assurances of assistance for veterans stand in stark contrast to the plight of those left behind, orphans, the elderly, and the sick, who languish in wait for support that rarely comes. As the government siphons resources to bolster its military ambitions, vital services dwindle. Will this divide continue to foster discontent? In the face of such despair, can peace even be negotiated? As the ink dries on laws' crackdowns on dissent, does truth still have a place in a culture dominated by propaganda? Amidst the struggle for recognition and aid, veterans battling crime often receive lenient sentences, their service twisted into a shadow of legitimacy. the very fabric of law and order phrase. How will this affect Russia's future? The war has reshaped not only borders but also souls, leaving humanity to grapple with the scars of survival. In a country where desperation looms, the echoes of battle reverberate far beyond the front lines, silencing victims, while a once proud military transforms into a community plagued by pain, destruction, and shame. What happens when warriors become outcasts in their own homeland? How far will this spiral of violence extend before society acknowledges the tragic cost of a battle that should never have been? In a world where the narrative of valiant soldiers returning home is glorified, a darker truth lurks beneath the surface. The mainstream media paints a picture of triumph, with heroic reunions and medal ceremonies. Yet, what happens when the cameras are turned off? The reality is alarming. As Russian state television broadcasts tales of military prowess, the aftermath of warfare reveals catastrophic consequences. Reports indicate that nearly 140,000 Russian soldiers returned to civilian life by mid-2025. Think about it, these veterans, once celebrated as defenders of the homeland, now find themselves grappling with the unbearable weight of their experiences. Instead of transitioning smoothly back into society, many face the specter of post-traumatic stress disorder, compounded by a lack of psychological support. Imagine stepping back into a world where the sights and sounds of battle echo relentlessly in your mind, a cacophony of chaos and despair. In a shocking twist, the state's efforts to reintegrate these soldiers seem woefully inadequate. Data reveals that crime among returning veterans is surging. In just 3 years since the start of the war, veterans have caused over 750 deaths. Often, their victims are loved ones, friends, the very fabric of their former lives unraveling in violence and tragedy. The government's response? Economic incentives for military service that leave ordinary citizens behind. While veterans receive substantial compensations, others, including orphans and the disabled, languish without support. It suggests a troubling future for a nation where military service is the only path to aid, creating a stark divide. What does this abandonment signify for the soul of Russia? As the number of veterans swells, their lives diverge down troubling paths. Many struggle to adapt to life after combat, with jobs offering a fraction of what they earned in service. The numbers are grim, most find employment in low-paying manual jobs, a far cry from the million-ruble salaries they once received. What happens when soldiers accustomed to resources and respect return to a world that seems to have forgotten them? To make matters worse, hospitals are closing while resources are funneled away from civilian needs. The impact on the country's workforce is staggering. The military comprises 3% of the labor force, continuously depleting the pool of workers. It raises a critical question: what happens to a nation when its young men are systematically removed from life, only to be replaced by sorrow and crime? These veterans, struggling with their haunting memories, might find solace in the embrace of chaos. Experts draw parallels to past societal upheavals, warning that as desperate conditions persist, crime rates could reach unprecedented heights. The cycle of violence is not merely a tragic aftermath of war, it is a harbinger of an unstable future for Russia. Dare to consider the implications of this cycle. If these soldiers, who once stood on the front lines, are now part of a rising tide of violence, what does that mean for society at large? As the shadows of war loom larger, the question remains: what price must Russia pay for its relentless ambition? A shocking promise echoes across the streets. The state hands a wounded soldier up to 4 million rubles, roughly $35,000, while ordinary families scramble for crumbs. Earlier we learned that the defenders of the Fatherland Foundation received tens of billions of rubles, building offices that hand out housing, medical care, and other aid. Now the payouts become a stark mirror. Those declared severely injured can walk away with 4 million rubles, more than a full year's military pay. At the same time, orphans, the disabled and the seriously ill sit in endless queues, waiting for benefits they are legally owed. A two-tier society emerges: veterans bathe in cash, everyone else starves. This favoritism feeds a relentless recruitment drive, pushing the war machine forward. What will happen when the money dries up and the promises crumble? Can cash turn protectors into predators on their own block? We just saw veterans swamped in compensation while the rest of the population languishes. That uneven wealth creates a dangerous incentive. Enlistment becomes the only realistic path to decent social services. The state's economic levers now push more citizens into the army, tightening the grip of the military-industrial complex and its ties to foreign partners like China and India. The result? A cycle where war funds the very society that craves peace. Corruption spreads, and the line between duty and desperation blurs. As the state hoards resources for soldiers, ordinary lives slip further into the shadows. Will the growing resentment spark a flood of unrest? Is the surge in veteran-related crime a symptom of a broken nation or a calculated outcome? We've traced how generous payouts and a privileged status have warped the social fabric, encouraging enlistment at any cost. Observers compare today's veterans to the Afghancy of the Soviet-Afghan War, soldiers who returned home and fueled a crime wave. Now, former fighters, some even recruited from prisons, join organized gangs, turning the underworld into a battlefield of contract killers and bodyguards. Legal leniency rewards their service, while a new law silences criticism of the armed forces. The criminal tide rises as mental health support stalls, and the state's focus on wartime benefits leaves a vacuum for violence to fill. What will the next generation inherit from a system that trades soldiers for security? Summary: the Russian military's tactics are failing, leading to unprecedented rates of desertion and surrender among soldiers. Faced with dire choices, many Russian troops prefer imprisonment or surrender over continuing to fight for their country. This underscores not only the personal toll on soldiers but also highlights a broader economic failure fueled by the war. What if the very act of serving your country could lead to your own downfall? In a military trapped in outdated strategies, Russian soldiers face a grim reality. Deployed to the front line, they often encounter death, while the alternative, remaining civilian, offers no safety net. With support from the government contingent on military status, many find themselves in a no-win situation. A desperate few have devised an alarming plan. Instead of marching to war, they are orchestrating their own imprisonment. These soldiers and their legal advisors craft cases to ensure jail time, keeping them far from the battlefield. However, there's no guarantee this will guard them from the horrors of war, especially with tens of thousands of convicts already drafted into military ranks. From February 2022 to May 2025 alone, an astonishing 49,000 soldiers chose deserters over duty. For some, even surrendering to Ukrainian forces feels like a better fate. They view the conditions in Ukrainian prisons as far more humane than what they might face in their homeland. The battle for Russian soldiers isn't just external, it's deeply personal. How did it come to this? A porous morale that reflects a systemic failure, where allegiance to the state is overshadowed by the dire conditions on the ground. Yet, the heart of this conflict beats louder in the economic landscape, as the war economy touted to benefit soldiers only bleeds resources from future generations, fueling a cycle of destruction. With monthly wages dictated by rank, the prospect of economic survival falters against the backdrop of warfare's grim toll. As footsteps echo in desolate barracks, the sense of purpose fades. What awaits these soldiers, honor or hardship? When the choice is between loyalty and survival, how many will choose to fight for what they believe is worth defending? This spiral intensifies, as reports signal breakdowns in military operations, fueled by outdated Soviet tactics and lack of quality equipment. In a landscape filled with drone surveillance and advanced intelligence from the West, how can an army fight effectively on the front lines? The soldiers left to navigate the chaos must wonder, are they simply pawns in a game with their lives at stake? Each day invites further disillusionment. As the conflict drones on, what will become of those who once stood ready to sacrifice everything? In this relentless drama, one truth becomes increasingly evident: the battle is not just for land but for the very soul of a nation, fractured by the choices of its leaders and the desperate measures of its soldiers. What sacrifices will they continue to make, and at what cost? The answers lie wrapped in a veil of uncertainty, awaiting their inevitable reveal. Previously we examined how the present Federation and its leadership steer the global balance, and we warned that a sudden shift could redraw the world's map. A single question shatters the polished narrative. What if the triumphant warriors paraded on state screens are the very source of a hidden nightmare that devours families, neighborhoods, and the nation's future, all while the cameras stay silent? The answer lurks in the silent homes of returning soldiers, where the scent of pine smoke mingles with the metallic sting of old battle gear, and the floorboards echo with footsteps that once thundered across foreign fields. In the first act we saw the glossy footage of soldiers marching back to cheers, medals glinting in the sunlight, and mothers weeping tears of pride. Yet, behind that choreography, more than 140,000 veterans have slipped back into civilian life by mid-2025. Imagine the clash of uniform fabric against a rough wooden table, the cold press of a pencil as they sign paperwork for benefits that sound generous but mask a deeper void. 1 in 5 of these men bears the invisible scar of trauma. The nation boasts fewer than one therapist for every 7,000 adults, leaving a sprawling wound untreated. The next chapter pulls the curtain back on a grim tally: over 750 murders and maimings committed by these veterans, most against relatives and friends. The air grows thick with the acrid smell of burnt alcohol as desperation fuels violence. Economically, the state hands out up to 4 million rubles, roughly $35,000, to severely injured fighters. A sum that rivals half a year's salary but creates a two-tier society where only those in uniform touch real aid. Meanwhile, orphans, the disabled, and the ailing wait years for promises that never arrive. Our story then turns to the spiral of crime that erupts when support falters. Former soldiers, haunted by the clang of distant artillery, drift into organized gangs, their training repurposed for darkness. The Wagnerization of the underworld births contract killers, and rival factions arm themselves, feeding a relentless cycle of fear. Courts, swayed by past service, hand down lighter sentences, while a new law silences any voice daring to expose these deeds. The clang of a gavel becomes a distant echo in streets already alive with sirens and whispered threats. In a final, gut-wrenching twist, the very strategy that keeps the war machine grinding, mass conscription, hollow promises, and a relentless push for expansion, unleashes a hidden army within. These Ukrainцы return not as protectors but as architects of a shadow state, ready to reshape politics from inside. The battlefield may lie far away, yet the decisive conflict now rages in living rooms, in the cold steel of a door latch, and in the quiet dread that each knock might herald a former comrade turned predator. The ultimate question remains: can a nation survive when the line between hero and monster blurs, and the only shield is a truth the cameras refuse to show? Earlier we learned that the Defenders of the Fatherland Foundation pours tens of billions of rubles into veteran aid, handing out housing, healthcare, and generous cash payouts. Did you know that a single severely wounded soldier can walk away with 4 million rubles, more money than a year's salary for many civilians, while orphaned children and chronically ill citizens wait years for the most basic assistance? How can a state justify such a stark, two-tier system that rewards battlefield trauma but abandons the most vulnerable? The payouts reach up to 4 million rubles, about $35,000 in mid-2025. That sum can eclipse a soldier's earnings for half a year, sometimes an entire year of service. Yet the rest of the population, orphans, people with disabilities, the seriously ill, often stare at endless queues, clutching empty hands, hearing only the echo of bureaucratic doors closing. This preferential treatment builds a society split in half. Military service becomes the only ladder to decent housing, healthcare, and a modest pension. Outside that ladder, corruption spreads like a cold wind through cracked windows, and ordinary citizens are left shivering in the dark. Economic incentives now push more people into the ranks. The defense industry, energy exports, and trade deals with distant partners all depend on a perpetual state of conflict. The leadership keeps the war alive, fearing that peace would shatter the illusion of prosperity that the payouts create. But not every veteran receives the promised support. Many return home bruised, haunted, and without a clear path forward. Their minds replay the roar of artillery, the smell of burnt fuel, the taste of iron in the air. Without proper care, their frustration hardens into violence. Crime among former soldiers has surged, not as a tragic side effect, but as a direct outcome of a system that weaponizes its own people. The streets whisper of robberies, assaults, and organized gangs led by those who once wore a uniform. What will become of a nation that trades its future for short-term military gain? The answer hangs in the cold silence of a dimly lit alley, where a former combatant waits, gun in hand, eyes fixed on a horizon that offers no redemption. What if the patriotic parades you see on television are just a polished mask hiding a nation's hidden disaster? The glittering footage of soldiers marching home, medals glinting in the sun and families weeping tears of joy is a story sold by the state. But when the cameras stop, a far darker picture emerges, one of shattered lives, unchecked violence, and an economy strangled by a war that feeds only the elite. The reality begins with the return of nearly 140,000 troops by mid-2025, a figure whispered by Kremlin sources. These veterans step off the battlefield into a world that offers little more than a hollow promise of reintegration support. In truth, the phrase conceals a looming social collapse. Millions of soldiers carry the invisible scars of post-traumatic stress. 1 in 5 is estimated to suffer from the condition, yet the country boasts fewer than one therapist for every 7,000 citizens. Imagine the sting of a hospital hallway, the metallic scent of antiseptic, the echo of a distant artillery blast replaying in a veteran's mind, day after day. Without proper care, many turn to drugs, alcohol, and the only outlet they know, violence. Since the invasion began, former combatants have been linked to more than 750 homicides, most of them against relatives and friends, turning homes into crime scenes. Will a nation built on such betrayal ever heal, or will the cycle of blood repay itself in darkness? Desperation drives some to flee the front altogether, only to discover that escape is blocked on every side. When the borders close, a new tactic appears: soldiers purposely get arrested, hoping a prison sentence will bar them from future drafts. Lawyers weave legal knots, crafting charges that could lock a man away for life. Yet the state answers by flooding the ranks with tens of thousands of convicted criminals, blurring the line between soldier and felon. An iStories investigation recorded 49,000 desertions between February 2022 and May 2025, a staggering exodus that reveals a morale shattered beyond repair. For those who cannot escape, surrender to Ukrainian forces seems the lesser evil. Prison camps there are rumored to be kinder than the grim cells back home. What does it mean when a soldier prefers enemy captivity over his own nation's jail? The answer hints at an empire on the brink of collapse, where the very concept of duty has become a death sentence. Even the war economy, painted as a lifeline for the troops, is a sophisticated form of extraction. Monthly pay hinges on rank and combat participation, with entry wages barely covering basic needs. Generous recruitment bonuses, sometimes 6 to 9 months of an already inflated salary, mask a recruitment drive that sidesteps unpopular mobilizations. These payouts, though seemingly generous, divert resources from the civilian population, orphans, the disabled, the seriously ill wait years for benefits that should be theirs by law. A two-tier society emerges, where military service is the sole gateway to any social safety net, and corruption thrives unchecked. If the state continues to weaponize its people for short-term gains, can any future ever be built from the ruins of today? The next chapter may decide whether the metal of metals will finally rust, or spark an ember of resistance that no propaganda can extinguish. In recent years, the narrative surrounding Russia's military engagements has painted a picture of might and triumph. State-controlled networks broadcast impressive images of soldiers returning home to joyous families, their sacrifices honored through public accolades. But beneath this orchestrated facade lies a harrowing truth that starkly contrasts with the propaganda. As the cameras click off and the celebratory music fades, the grim reality unfolds. Many soldiers are grappling with physical and mental scars that aren't easily visible. More than 140,000 military personnel have reintegrated into civilian life since the conflicts intensified, yet the support promised by the government appears to be more of a bureaucratic illusion than a tangible reality. Imagine the confusion and chaos these veterans face when they return. Reports suggest that they are not merely coming back to heroes' welcomes, Instead, a significant number are becoming a threat to their own communities. Since the invasion began, over 750 people have been harmed by returning veterans, often from their own circles. Domestic violence and crime statistics are skyrocketing, turning families into battlegrounds of despair. What drives this cycle of violence? Many soldiers endure extreme trauma that manifests in violent outbursts, fueled by untreated psychological issues. With only a handful of therapists available per capita, servicemen are left without the support they desperately need. The same system that glorifies their combat service seems to abandon them once they hang up their uniforms. Worse yet, the Kremlin's propaganda machine obscures the fact that the war is draining the very fabric of Russian society. Soldiers return with missing limbs and battered psyches, adding to a growing crisis of mental health. As they struggle to adapt, many find solace in destructive behaviors, such as substance abuse. This adds another layer of tragedy to the nation's predicament. Consider the disquieting reality: the battle on foreign soils is not just about victory or defeat, it's about the erosion of societal norms back home. The returning veterans, many of whom come from rural backgrounds, are often at a heightened risk of developing entrenched substance issues due to a lack of resources. The military's focus on recruitment in these areas has transformed them into breeding grounds for despair. As economic sanctions tighten their grip, Russia's military efforts shine a spotlight on a crumbling economic structure reliant on warfare. Despite hefty financial support for veterans, many other citizens grapple with bureaucratic delays and systemic neglect. This preferential treatment fuels anger and resentment, creating a divide that fosters unrest. Now, with the looming threat of sanctions and scrapped trade agreements, Russia finds itself cornered. If China, its foremost ally, turns away, the already fragile economy may collapse entirely. This situation breeds frustration, endangering not only the veterans but society at large. The soldiers crafted for valor may soon emerge as harbingers of chaos. As these dynamics unfold, one unsettling question rises: how does a nation built on war and trauma move toward peace? If Putin were to abandon his relentless pursuit of expansion, it would expose the gaping wounds in not only the military strategy but the very essence of Russian identity, stripping away the illusion of strength and revealing a landscape of devastation. In essence, while Russia may fight to maintain its global standing, the true battle lies within, leading to a terrifying possibility: a nation fighting against its own future. If the regime collapses, it could send shockwaves throughout the world, altering the geopolitical landscape in unimaginable ways. What happens next could redefine the future, not just for Russia, but for the entire world. The lingering question remains: will there be peace or perpetual conflict? In the realm of global conflict, a disconcerting truth looms. Often, state-sponsored narratives present an illusion of heroism, glory, and victory. Yet, behind the polished camera lens lies an unsettling reality, especially concerning the soldiers fighting on the front lines. While they might be celebrated as valiant defenders of the homeland, the consequences of their return home tell a different story, one shrouded in darkness and despair. As we delve into this narrative, we find that frontline footage from state-run media presents a well-orchestrated display of military might and triumph. Soldiers are celebrated with emotional reunions, tears of joy, and heartfelt gratitude from their communities. But once the cameras are turned off, a grim reality emerges, one where the unrecognized toll of war manifests in society. What happens to these veterans once they return? A staggering report unveils that over the past few years, they have been implicated in the deaths and injuries of more than 750 people, many being their own friends and family. The heinous crimes committed at home reflect a fractured psyche where the horrors of war seep into civilian life. This isn't merely about numbers, it speaks to a society that has weaponized its own and prioritized military glory over human life. In just 3 years since the war escalated, almost 140,000 soldiers have re-entered civilian life, burdened with invisible scars and potential post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. According to various sources, many struggle to reintegrate and often turn to drugs and alcohol, exacerbating societal issues. Russia's lack of adequate mental health support leaves these brave souls without the necessary resources for healing. While there are funds, hundreds of millions of rubles allocated for veterans, this aid oftentimes serves as a band-aid on a gaping wound. The disparity between the perks given to soldiers and the daily struggles faced by ordinary citizens creates a jarring divide in society. Orphans and the disabled wait years for benefits that should be theirs by right, while veterans frequently receive priority as they navigate life post-service. This imbalance fosters an alarming trend. With military service becoming a route to social recognition and support, crime rates in cities skyrocket. The returning veterans, whose backgrounds may include brushes with the law, find a welcoming environment amongst criminal networks that exploit their skills and experiences. Reports suggest a disturbing uptick in veteran-related crimes, drawing parallels with previous conflicts, yet on a larger, more chaotic scale. The consequences of this reality extend beyond immediate crime rates. Society transforms. Sensationalism creates an environment where military service is glorified, while underlying issues rot unnoticed. As we ponder this, one must ask, what lies ahead for a country where the line between hero and criminal blurs? What future awaits a society teetering on the edge of chaos? In Moscow, laws tighten against dissent and scrutiny, making it increasingly perilous for independent voices trying to shed light on these dark truths. As veterans often receive leniency in the justice system, the shadows of their past loom large, creating a false sense of invincibility. Where does this path lead? Will we witness a cycle of violence fueled by a system in disarray? The once glorious image of Russia as a formidable power may dwindle in the face of its own creations. With this disquieting awareness, we wonder, could a new breed of politicians, emboldened by their experiences, reshape the very fabric of Russian society, steering it towards an even darker future? As we approach the climax of this tale, one question lingers in the air: how much longer can the facade of heroism mask the impending catastrophe? And as we inch closer to an uncertain resolution, every twist reveals yet another harrowing truth about the state of a nation in turmoil. The stage is set for an explosive finale that might change everything. In the echo of boots marching home, could they also be heralding the dawn of a new, terrifying reality for Russia? The coming chapters will expose how the past intertwines with the future, leaving us at the brink of revelation. In recent years, a compelling narrative has emerged about Russia's military exploits, presenting a facade of strength and victory. State-backed media channels broadcast heartwarming scenes of soldiers returning home to elated families, their sacrifices celebrated with medals and accolades. However, beyond this polished image, a disturbing truth lurks, one that sharply contrasts the glorified version of events. When the cameras stop clicking and the celebratory music dims, a much harsher reality comes to light. Many veterans struggle with both visible and invisible scars. Since the onset of heightened conflict, over 140,000 soldiers have transitioned back to civilian life. Yet, the promised support from the government appears more like a bureaucratic illusion than substantial relief. Imagine stepping into your old life, only to find it unrecognizable. That's the chaotic return many face. Instead of heroes' welcomes, numerous veterans pose a threat to their communities. Reports indicate that since the invasion began, more than 750 individuals have been affected by violent incidents involving returning soldiers, often targeting friends and family. What drives this disturbing trend? The answer lies in deep-rooted trauma. Many servicemen come back bearing the weight of psychological scars, which too often erupt in torrents of violence. With an insufficient number of mental health professionals, one therapist for every 7,000 adults, these veterans are effectively cast adrift in a sea of untreated psychological turmoil. The very system that heralds their military service provides little support once they retire their uniforms. The troubling reality is that the war isn't just taking a toll far from home, it's weakening the societal framework of Russian life itself. Soldiers return with deep physical and mental wounds, joining a growing population in crisis. Struggling to reintegrate, many turn to destructive habits like substance abuse, further complicating an already dire situation. Picture this grim tableau: battles on foreign fronts seep into domestic life, morphing homes into war zones of distress. Perhaps most alarming is the effect this environment has on rural soldiers, who disproportionately face heightened risks of addiction due to the lack of resources. Recruitment in these areas has transformed once thriving communities into landscapes of despair, exacerbated by tightening economic sanctions. Despite the substantial financial support granted to veterans, the general populace finds themselves ensnared in bureaucratic delays and systemic neglect. This creates a significant divide, fostering unrest among those left behind. As the shadow of sanctions looms larger and trade agreements falter, Russia's military ambitions spotlight a deteriorating economic structure. The possibility of losing China, its main ally, poses a catastrophic threat to an already fragile economy. This interconnected crisis heightens frustrations, not only for veterans but also for society at large, leading to the harrowing realization, those bred for bravery might soon become agents of chaos. With these shifting dynamics, one unsettling question arises: how does a nation steeped in trauma and warfare find its way to peace? If Putin were to renounce his relentless expansionism, the gaping wounds, both in military tactics and national identity, would be starkly exposed. This reality could reveal a landscape of dissolution rather than dominance. While Russia battles to uphold its global position, the fiercest struggle rages internally, a nation fighting against its own future. The potential fallout from a regime collapse could send shockwaves around the globe, shifting the political landscape in ways we can hardly imagine. What the future holds remains uncertain. Will there be a pursuit of harmony, or will the fires of conflict continue to blaze? The questions resonate, echoing in the minds of those who sense the impending storm. In a world where the heroism of soldiers returning home is celebrated, a chilling reality hides beneath the surface. Amidst the grand narratives of valor and reunion, a disturbing truth emerges: what happens when the cameras stop rolling? As Russian state television broadcasts tales of military might, the grim aftermath of conflict unveils catastrophic consequences. A staggering 140,000 Russian soldiers have returned to civilian life by mid-2025. Picture this: once hailed as defenders of the homeland, these veterans now battle the ghosts of their war experiences. Far from smoothly reintegrating into society, many of them face the heavy toll of post-traumatic stress disorder, and the absence of adequate psychological support compounds their suffering. Can you imagine stepping back into a world that echoes with the sounds of gunfire and chaos, memories that ensnare your mind in a relentless grip? In a shocking turn of events, state efforts to assist these soldiers seem woefully inadequate. Reports highlight a surge in crime linked to returning veterans. Over 750 deaths attributed to their actions were recorded in just 3 years since the outbreak of conflict. Disturbingly, most victims are acquaintances or family members, the very people these soldiers used to cherish. The government's remedy? Financial incentives that favor military personnel, leaving civilians, orphans, the sick, and the disabled behind in the cold. What does this systemic neglect reveal about Russia's collective soul? As the count of veterans increases, their life trajectories take alarming turns. Many grapple with the haunting specters of their combat days, unable to stabilize their lives in the absence of supportive structures. Jobs available to them often pay a fraction of their previous military salaries, throwing them into a harsh reality of underemployment. What happens when these soldiers, accustomed to honor and financial stability, find themselves marginalized in a society that appears to have forgotten them? To make the situation worse, hospitals are shutting down, and resources are being directed away from civilian needs. The impact on the workforce is staggering. The military, comprising 3% of the labor force, continually depletes vital human resources. This leads to a haunting question: what becomes of a nation when its youth are systematically stripped away, replaced by despair and criminality? Facing inner turmoil and societal rejection, these veterans may seek refuge in chaos. Experts draw alarming parallels to previous social upheavals, cautioning that as desperation grows, crime rates could soar beyond imagination. This cycle of violence doesn't simply represent the painful aftermath of war, it signals a dangerously unstable future for Russia. Consider the grave implications of this escalating crisis. If those who once bravely defended the nation now become a rising tide of destruction, what does it portend for society as a whole? As the ominous shadow of war looms ever larger, one critical question remains: what cost will Russia bear for its unyielding ambitions? The answer may redefine the essence of a nation struggling to reconcile its past with a future teetering on the brink of turmoil.